Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries. I'm John, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about the end of my long-running Smoke and Snow Old School Essentials game after the music. Okay, so we had our last session, for the moment at least, of our Old School Essentials Smoke and Snow campaign. Obviously there's going to be spoilers and such like for that, so if you don't want to hear that, you might want to come back to this video later. In the last session, the characters were attempting to retrieve the body of the wife of one of their characters, the barbarian Brock Montaigne, that had been stolen to have some evil and necromantic rite performed on it. This necromantic rite was designed to invest the body with a demonic spirit known as the Scarlet Empress, who is effectively the opposite number of the current first vampire baddie in the setting, known as the Crimson King, who in eons past, a member of an ancient race known as Brondra Lat, had this demonic spirit that had escaped from a portal bound into his body by an order of ancient mages called the Senna, and he'd volunteered for this, knowing that they could then confine his possessed body to this particular place, this frozen castle, and sort of lock the evil away, so to speak. He effectively then, because of this demonic taint in him, became the first vampire of our setting. He's the Cain of our setting, if you want to use the older World of Darkness sort of nomenclature there. And he's basically been working on a way to both restore his opposite number, the Scarlet Empress, and also find a way to escape his imprisonment and stretch out his evil undead talons across the land. So the players who are going to try and stop this, the barbarian Brock Montaigne had used his recently gained class ability to call upon a horde of 250 barbarians, and they were going to march towards this castle, around which the Crimson King and his sort of lesser children, the normal sort of vampires in the setting, who were less powerful than him but weren't bound to the castle in the same way. That's how he'd been spreading his influence. They were gathering a huge undead army so that when he was free, he could then march across the landscape, bringing death and destruction to all in his wake. So the way we decided to work this was effectively the barbarian horde would occupy the undead army outside, which I tracked very abstractly. I sort of decided they were roughly evenly matched. There were more undead, but their troops were less competent, whereas the barbarians were all like sort of leveled fighters and stuff like that, but there were less of them. So just every now and again during the session, I would have both myself for the bad guys and Darren Green, who plays Brock, roll a d6, and whoever got the highest number would decide that's how the sort of battle was progressing. So we started off with the sort of barbarian horde sort of making a strong start, despite taking early losses because of missile fire. Once they got stuck into combat, their greater skill was telling. However, they then got encircled by the undead, who had vastly superior numbers, and they had evil magics on their side, something the Ice Walker barbarians don't truck with. But eventually the Ice Walkers were able to break out of that, and they were triumphant. And this was all sort of described and sort of handled fairly sort of descriptively and narratively by myself as the session went on, since it was only really a backdrop as such. Meanwhile, the player characters entered the frozen castle, or castle blut, as I stereotypically decided to call it, of the evil vampire lord. And obviously there were, despite the fact that the vast majority of his undead were outside, there were still some of his minions inside, and these included some of his elder children. So there were 6 vampires in all in the castle. That's not counting the Crimson King, because he was confined to the uppermost level and couldn't leave that because of this arcane binding. But there were a number of his other, I say elder children, so his most powerful children, but still lesser than him. And what they did with them is they would have 3 of them rest at a time, because there was no sort of like natural light in the lower levels of the castle, so they could be active a little bit more than vampires would be normally. They would have 3 of them active, conducting this ceremony to put conjure this demonic essence from the demonic abyss, the demonic gate they'd managed to open, and put it in the body of Lanrivar, Brock's wife, so that she would be embodied in that, and then the Scarlet Empress would have entered the world. And while 3 of them were doing that, 3 of them would rest in coffins, and they would sort of rotate, so they could sort of keep this incredibly long and sort of baroque ceremony going, sort of non-stop, really. Because, well, even vampires got a rest. Even if they didn't, why would they need coffins? So that was the setting. The player characters made their way in there. They fought against some like wights. There were some hellhounds. They sort of quite ingeniously worked their way past on the drawbridge going into it, and they eventually found their way down to the lower levels, the catacombs below the castle. They discovered the 3 of the vampires in the coffins, and realising that rightly they don't want to face 3 vampires in open combat, they effectively killed them while they were in their coffins, sort of trapping them inside, stabbing enchanted blades and holy weapons through the lids, throwing garlic in, all manner of like great stuff which dealt with those 3. They then proceeded on and eventually came across the 3 vampires who were performing the ceremony. They were able to prevent the ceremony from being performed with our rogue Quentin using a dispel curse scroll effectively on the body of land to like disrupt the energies that were being conjured from this abyss. However, that then freed up these 3 vampires, well, 2 of them, because one of them was trying to get the ritual restarted, to face the player characters. And as I may have said earlier on in a video, we don't use the sort of we haven't been using the sort of standard level drain rules. We use the alternative offered in issue 1 of the Noxine by the Merry Mushman, and that was in an article written by Gaber Lux, and it basically proposes that instead of draining levels and you have to slog your way through all that XP, they actually drain stats. So Wights, Wraiths and other lesser undead drain 1d6 constitution, Spectres, Vampires and other greater undead drain 2d4 constitution, Shadows drain 1d4 strength. Your scores recover at a rate of 1 per day, and a character drained to 0 and a score is lost and becomes an undead of a given type. And as it quite rightly says in this article, with these changes in effect, undead represent a greater immediate threat, but they don't damage long-term player viability. And don't get me wrong, if you love the old level drain, absolutely fine, you crack on. I've always found it a bit of a chore though for you to have to work up to getting all these XP to get up to a certain level, and then you're effectively like set back and you've got to work your way back up again. And I understand that's part of the fear of level drain, you're threatening something the players value, and that's fine, but it's the long slog to get back to where you were that doesn't really appeal to me. Whereas this knock sort of based, attribute drain based sort of technique I find more interesting, because like it says in Knock issue 1, it makes them more deadly in the immediate term, but if you can rest up for a few days you will recover. However, going into a combat, even if you got well lucky with your rolls, any old school character is probably only going to have 18 max in a stat, so you can literally, for some of these like higher level undead, I mean, like if a vampire rolls their maximum, they can just hit you once and be like boom, there's 8 constitution gone. And even if you've got max, you've only got 10 left. So like if the GM gets a high roll, a few hits from a vampire, and you can be done, and you'll be rising up again as a vampire yourself. And that's pretty much what happened in the encounter we had. Once the vampires who were occupied with their ceremony realised that the heroes were there, they turned their attention to them, and gradually they fell below the constitution draining effects of the vampires' bites and claw attacks. Weimar Lonegrove, due mainly to like him eating garlic every other round, which vampires have to make a save or be repulsed by, was able to survive for like a ridiculous number of rounds, despite being on like relatively low hit points and constitution at that point. But once his garlic ran out and they they started being able to get in there, he was soon overwhelmed himself, using his last heroic moment. And I like to give people a bit of a heroic moment or a chance to do like a sort of one-liner or something. It doesn't stop you dying, but, you know, I like to think it takes the edge off a bit and it makes things a little bit more dramatic. And I normally give a little bit of license, you know, depending on what people want to do in these situations. Weimar possessed a holy weapon known as the Sun Sword, which was, its whole thing was like killing undead, basically. So as he was sort of transforming, and I sort of described the fact that like wisps of smoke had already started to come out from between his fingers as he was holding the sword, as he was slowly changing, he basically apologised to the sword and said that he'd done his best and sort of asked for forgiveness, at which point I dramatically had it like flare up in sunlight and basically like throw his body into this abyss behind him, leaving his fate somewhat unclear. And as I say, I like to have a bit of a dramatic flair for that. Now, once we'd finished and we wrapped up the session, we sort of talked about what we wanted to do next. And that's on the very end of the sort of actual play recording. I'll put a link with like a YouTube card or something in the YouTube version of this episode. And I'll probably put a link in the description as well, in case you're listening on the audio version. But we had a bit of a chat about what we wanted to do next. We could have easily picked up with another party in the same world, but we've been pretty much running a campaign set in this game mode now for 2 years, pretty much, I believe. I mean, if I look on my Twitch page at the moment, we've effectively got 46 episodes of the campaign, each of those being sort of like 3 to 4 hours long. Like I say, we've been running for 2 years. So after a bit of a chat, we decided it might be nice to do something a little different for a while, but we quite fancied the idea of returning to this sort of world in the future, possibly with some sort of like time jump. Now, I've got all my notes for this campaign, all the session write-ups and everything from when it first started on Obsidian Notes, so that's not a problem. And in fact, over the next day or two, I'll be writing up the sort of final notes and sort of session write-up for this particular campaign. So even though the Smoke and Snow campaign has concluded, it's very possible when we next do some old school D&D, we may pick up with a new party, maybe with a bit of a time jump in this same campaign world, perhaps in a different location, because we've already got all of that sort of lore and stuff like that established, so it'd be a shame to let it go to waste. We've been chatting a bit on Facebook over the morning of today, as this is being recorded, which is on the day after the campaign's wrapped up, and we're potentially looking at doing something with a little bit more of a, maybe like a modern world spin, probably a small sort of like finite campaign, like a mini campaign, as a bit of a sort of palate cleanser after we've finished OSE, before we decide if we want to jump back into fantasy or do something else. Because as I said to the group, I'm very keen to keep the group. I think we've got a great group, and the time slot of running bi-weekly on Friday, which seems to work for us all, and everyone still seems quite enthused to continue playing, which is always a good thing as far as I'm concerned. And everyone seemed to enjoy the session despite the many character deaths that occurred during it. So again, that's always good, and I had great fun running that campaign for all the various people involved. Some of the people we had early on didn't make it to the end of the campaign for various reasons, and that's fine. That's just how things are. But for everyone who's played in the campaign either now or in the past, it's been great role-playing with them. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to the next campaign. So that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed this quick discussion about the end of our recent Smoke and Snow campaign. Hopefully we're going to have a meet-up virtually with the player group in the next couple of weeks and discuss what we want to do next. Maybe do a bit of session 0 and character genning, and then hopefully a couple of weeks after that we'll be ready to start a new campaign, and I'm very much looking forward to that. But hopefully we'll swing around to revisiting the world of Smoke and Snow at some point in the future. So if you've enjoyed this video, maybe you'd like to comment on it or drop us a message. Let us know how you've handled the end of your campaigns and whether you've decided to push on in the same campaign world or do something different afterwards. Either way, we'd love to hear from you. You can get in touch with us a number of different ways. You can send us a voicemail message using either SpeakPipe or Anchor. There'll be links in the description of this episode. Or you can send us an email to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. So until we see you again, take care, stay safe, and whatever you're playing, have fun.